course, I'm John Groves, and right now I'm 95. But during the war, when I joined the Navy on December the 8th, 1941,
Ooh.
which was the day after Pearl Harbor. And they give you 5 days to take care of your personal business before you have to report. So on the 13th of December 1941, I was in Great Lakes. And I went down to Detroit to get a train to go to Chicago. And there was quite a few people going to encampments at that time. But I didn't have any of my family with me. I was the only one there without somebody to say goodbye to me, and a woman came up to me and said, where's your goodbye party? I said, well, they're all working in the factory right now. And she said, well, I'll spend the day with you as long as you're here. So she held hands with me. And finally I got on the train and I went to Chicago at Great Lakes. And it was interesting being there because on December the 8th, 1941, 35,000 men joined the service. And they didn't have room enough to house 35,000 men. And that was a total of all services. As I stayed in Great Lakes, I got there on December the 13th, but just before Christmas that year, I don't know what was going on, but I saw everybody getting dressed and packing up their bags to go home. And I said, where are you going? They said, I'm going home for Christmas. And I said, well, if you go home, I can go home. So I went home for Christmas. But I didn't have any leave papers or anything. I just did it. And I came through on Michigan and Verner Highway, where the train station is. I came through there with my bag, and the police, the service policemen were checking people out. And I just scooted around them and went up on Michigan Avenue, caught the bus and went home. And I came back after New Year's, and the people that I knew there said, where have you been? If you didn't come today, we were going to report you as a AWOL. I said, well, I wanted to stay home for Christmas and New Year's. And most of those guys were really from Chicago. But we were training, and training in boot camp meant that you went out and marched around the field for a day till the guy that was training you got tired. And boot camp was 6 weeks, and so that put us at the end of January. We left on a train. There was a group of us that got on the train, and we were going to New York City to become part of the USS Lafayette, which was really the Normandy. And the Normandy was a luxury liner from France that the United States just took a charge of because it came into the New York harbor to escape the Germans. It said to us, you can't get off of the train. And somebody said, why not? And I said, we could look at it, it's on fire. The Lafayette was on fire. They were doing maintenance work to change it to a troop transport from a luxury liner. And where they were welding on the deck, there was a bunch of life preservers. And the life preservers caught on fire. The mayor of Chicago at that time was LaGuardia, and LaGuardia was unhappy with the Navy because they were pumping so much black smoke on Manhattan. And he sent 2 fireboats up to put water on the fire, to put out the fire. but they pumped so much water on the ship that the ship capsized. And they said, you have no place to go, so they kept us on the train. And we went up and down New England till they found us a place to stay. And they found the Quonset Point, Rhode Island, which was a naval air station, and we were in a replacement center. And one morning we got up, one of the chiefs there told us about this new outfit they were forming called the Seabees. And he explained what they did and what they were going to do. And it sounded to me like it was where I wanted to go. Not everybody in our contingency wanted to be in the Seabees. Some of them wanted other assignments, and but I sort of liked the Seabees because I was more suited for it by my training in Emory Ford Trade School. So I put my hand up and I became part of the 1st Battalion of Seabees. And they had no place to put us again. But they shipped us out. We went to an NYA camp in Mattoon, Illinois. Now, an NYA camp was one of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's alphabetical arrangements. It meant something, but I don't know what the National Youth Authority I would think it to be. And the youths were all scattered, and they were turning it into a barracks to put the new recruits in for the Army and the Navy. And we went from Mattoon, Illinois, we went to Norfolk, Virginia. And we were in Norfolk, we were in a barracks there that had no heat in it. We were in Norfolk, and one morning they said, okay, pack your bags, get everything ready, you're leaving and you're going to Island X, but turn your rifles in. This is important because we were trained with M1 Durand rifles, which were the best rifles America had to give to their troops at the time, but they didn't have many of them. Anyway, they took all our M1 rifles, and I presume they put them in an armory, and we went out to sea on the East Coast. And if you remember, on the East Coast, there were sinking ships, rather, the submarines were sinking American ships rapidly. And we were out all day long, and we had no escort. But we slept that night on top of the deck because we were scared of getting torpedoed. And we were headed down to Panama Canal. But the next morning we woke up, there was nothing but ships, 1,000 ships around us. And our head escort was the USS Texas, which is a battleship. You know, battleships are named after states. And it was our escort to go down to Panama Canal, and we went through the Panama Canal, and we got into the Pacific, and we had no escort at all on the Pacific. And I thought, well, what the heck, the Japs don't have any submarines anyway. So I found out later that they had an awful lot of submarines, which they got from the Germans. But we went to Island X, which turned out to be Tonga. Now Tonga was the next island to Guadalcanal, but they had not made their landing on Guadalcanal yet when we went out there. And we were when the Marines came in, they would stay in our place for a day or two, and they would give them recreation and practically anything they wanted. Um, and I looked at these Marines, and they looked like they were 15, 16-year-old kids. They looked young. And I was 20 at the time, so I'd been around the horn a few times. In the Navy hands out every personnel that goes into the Navy a manual. And in that manual, it tells you that if you're a petty officer, you don't have to do certain menial labor. Well, we got on Tonga and we left Tonga. We went to another island, but our supply ship didn't catch up to us, so we had nothing to do. So the lieutenant, he had an idea one morning. He said, I've got a job for you guys. And he said, I want you to come over to the officers club and clean up all these cigarette butts. And I looked at the cigarette butts and I said, I'm not doing it. But I never said this to anybody. I just told myself, you're not doing it. So I sat on a log and the chief came by and he would say, come on now, you've been told 3 times, get up and do your work. And I wouldn't say anything to him. Then he got tired, so the lieutenant came over. The lieutenant says, listen, I'm going to put you on report if you don't pick up the cigarette butts. So anyway, I wouldn't pick up cigarette butts. He said, now listen, he said, you've had enough warning. You go get your whites, you're going up before the captain. So come hell or high water, I was not going to pick up cigarette butts after anybody, because I didn't even smoke cigarettes. So we go before the captain, and the lieutenant charged me with refusing to work at time of war, which is a serious offense. And the captain said to me, he says, sailor, he said, refusing to work in time of war is a very serious charge. And I said, well, Your Honor, I said, I didn't refuse to work. I said, I refused to pick up cigarette butts. And I explained to him that I had left an important job in General Motors to come to the service. And I said, in accordance with the Navy manual, I did not have to do menial work, was the way it was explained. And I cited him everything that the manual said. And he looked at the lieutenant and he said, Lieutenant, did you ever read the Blue Jackets manual? And the lieutenant said, no. He said, well, the sailor's right, you're wrong. He says, case dismissed. And I was walking out of the court, and the captain says, sailor, come on back here. He said, you can't go to work for him. He says, he will get you one way or another. And so they put me in charge of all the well, the undisciplinary sailors that didn't want to, the screw-offs. And I became their worst enemy because I knew that they needed attention. And so anyway, that was one of the lessons I learned in the service was there are things you can do and there are things you can't do. But I also could have been caught with a captain who didn't know that, and I could have been in serious trouble. We spent on Tonga, we spent 18 months. I don't know the time, but maybe it was a year. But while we were there, we built Quonset huts, which are the round things that we even slept in them after a while. But when we first went there, we slept in tents in a coconut grove, and the coconuts used to fall off the tree and come right through the tent. But we did a lot of dynamiting. We dynamited the harbor. Just came in a little ways into the island, and we wanted to go farther to bring supplies in, and we wouldn't have to carry them so far. So we put another 400 feet of on the dredge by dynamiting the area. And while we were in Tonga, the USS Saratoga came in. Now, the Saratoga was one of the 5 aircraft carriers that we had after World War, or after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I used to know the 5 names, but Saratoga was one that was the most important to me because I spent a lot of time on it. And it was after the Coral Sea battle, which was a battle, one of the first battles that the Navy won in the Pacific. And while the war was over, that particular battle was over, the commander of the Saratoga just sat there doing nothing. And off over here was a Jap submarine. And the Jap submarine shot a torpedo and put it in the bow of the Saratoga. And the importance of this thing is that the Saratoga was the only aircraft carrier that had its own electric generator in it. And the torpedo knocked the electrical generator out of commission. So the Saratoga is just sitting there. But the Jap, he took off. He could have put another torpedo on it and sank it. But they hooked because it couldn't move, they hooked a cruiser to it. Cruiser's a ship just under a battleship. It's a pretty good sized ship. And they brought it into our harbor. And while it was on our harbor, an auxiliary job, I was on the crew of this barge. And on the barge, we loaded sand, we loaded stone, which was probably coral at that time, because we used to, if we were making concrete, instead of stone, we used coral. And we would put cement in there to make concrete out of it. And we put a wood bulkhead inside this aircraft carrier where the torpedo went through. And we poured concrete in there and made it so it could go to Pearl Harbor and get renovated and become a viable ship again.
This was the aim of the powerful enemy fleet which sought to pierce our naval defense of Guadalcanal. Seabees were making routine repairs on this carrier when she received orders to put to sea immediately to check the enemy counterattack. How those Seabees stayed on the job through the critical sea battle that followed is a story that construction men will still be talking about when this war is safely bound between the covers of history.
But I think Ifadi was probably the worst place to be, because on Ifadi I contracted dysentery, and the medical base on that island was in the center of the island, and you had to walk probably a couple miles to get to it, and chances were that you were going to flop in a puddle of water, and they drag you out and throw you in a bed, and everybody in that hospital had dysentery. And you're a newcomer, and you don't know, because you filled your pants whether you're a disgrace to the Navy or not. And finally somebody that had a little more compassion would make you feel a little better, and they would tell you, don't worry about it, everybody here is in the same condition.
In the United States Army, one of the great causes of sickness is diarrhea and dysentery. One of the greatest causes of diarrhea and dysentery is the dirty mess kit. Chow! Come and get it!
We spent the rest of the year in Ifadi, and the news, the scuttlebutt was that we were going to go back to the States. And it seemed that there was a possibility of going to a vacation in Australia or going back home, and I think everybody wanted to go home. I would have rather have gone to Australia, just to be able to see the place. But we went back to the States, and they broke the 1st Battalion up. They broke us up in probably of the 1,100 men. Probably it was broken 11 different times. And fortunately, I got to go back to Honolulu. I was on a crew that was rigging cranes to lift loads that were more weight than the cranes were supposed to lift. And I wouldn't lift them. If it was a 1,000-ton lift, I wouldn't lift any more than 1,000 tons. But on the one crane that I was working on, it was a hydraulic crane that they had problems making it stable, and it was they didn't know that above it was a high tension wire that was coming into the base where we were moving all the machinery. And the machinery was very heavy stuff, and when I went to pick up the crane, because it was also on rubber wheels, there was no grounding of it except me. And I went up to reach for the sling, and it threw me perpendicular to the ground. And I landed on my head, and I was nothing but a bunch of mess. And to take care of me, they had to have one guy sit on each arm and one on each leg. And the ambulance came and took me to the hospital. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctor said, "Do you have these epileptic fits very often, son?" And then I said, "I don't know what the heck you're talking about." And I said, "Oh, I don't even know my own name right now." He said, "Well, that's all after effect. Go on back to your bunk." They bandaged up my head, and they changed the diagnosis from epilepsy to the fact that I was electrocuted, and I should have been dead. Pretty soon, something happened that you knew it was strange, but you didn't know what it was. And it was in the atmosphere. It was when they dropped the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The atomic bomb.
Yeah, you felt it, but you didn't know what it was. And pretty soon it was out that it was the atomic bomb at both blasts. And reasonably soon thereafter, the war was over. And they asked me if I wanted to stay in the Navy and be a chief petty officer or become a civilian. I said, I want to be a civilian. And I got discharged in Toledo, Ohio on the 25th of November, which was still a long time after the war was over. We came across the United States in a train, and it was your bed was a sit-up seat, and they had a barrel of steak and milk, and that was what you ate all the time you were on that train. And nobody was complaining about it because it was good steak and it was a good milk. But you know you were going to go home soon. Yeah, it was a great adventure.
We're the Seabees of the Navy. We can build and we can fly. We'll pave our way to victory and guard it day